welcome to Inside the FLX. I'm Josh Durso, and as always, we are coming to you from the FingerLakes1.com studios in downtown Seneca Falls. We have a very exciting show today as Geneva Town Supervisor Mark Venuti joins us in studio to talk about some important issues facing Geneva as well as Ontario County as a whole. Mark, thanks a lot for coming on today.
Thanks for having me, Josh. Glad to be here.
So, first off, before we get into any of the heavy stuff, tell us a little bit about how you got started, how you worked your way into politics, and what your life has looked like up to this road.
All right. I'll try not to kill the whole half hour. So I grew up in Geneva. I went to Cornell University as undergrad. And then I wanted to go to a city, so I ended up in Washington, D.C. to go to law school. And I stayed in Washington. After law school, I joined the D.C. bar and lived and practiced law for 10 years in D.C. That's where I met my wife. We started having our family, a couple of children, and big city living is a difficult thing. It's great when you're single and young and running around, but raising a family, you have to be wealthy or something that we weren't. And I was starting to feel the pull back to home, and so I talked my wife into giving Geneva, New York, back to my hometown a shot, and promised her if it didn't work out, she could make the next move. But it did work out. So then I came back to my hometown, opened a practice here, and I did start getting involved in politics pretty soon. Got involved I'm a Democrat, started out in the Jimmy Carter days. That's when I became a Democrat. That's how old I am, in college. But anyway, I practiced law, worked on some campaigns, and then I kind of got burned out on politics. I worked on an assembly campaign that was showed me the ugly side of it, and I kind of realized maybe I don't have thick enough skin for this. So I ran for judge in my town, and I was a town judge for 12 years. And if you know anything about judges, you can't be in politics. You can't go to dinners. You can't even write a letter to the editor. So I did that. I'm a lawyer, so it made sense. And so I'm out of politics for this middle period. But then that started to grate on me because I wanted to get involved. I've always been someone that's been involved in the community. And during that time I was doing I was helped found the Boys and Girls Club of Geneva. I did a lot of community stuff, but I couldn't get into the sort of the politics or the issues. And at that time the landfill and other issues were coming to the front. I felt like the environment here was sort of under siege. It was fracking was in the news, had not been banned yet. We've got the landfills, we've got the LP storage things are going on. So I finally said, I got to get out of being a judge. I got to get back in the mix. So I didn't. After my last term, there were 3-4-year terms ended. I did not run for re-election. I ran for town board shortly after that. Did not win. I lost by like 8 votes. And then I ran for supervisor and won. And I'm in the 3rd year of a 4-year term. And so I practice law, and I'm a supervisor.
So I guess that my next question is just carrying along with that line. How hard was it to shut it off, the caring part, while you were a judge?
Well, so I was doing a lot of community stuff, but it wasn't the politics part. I was grumbling and talking to people, but I couldn't actively take a position on something. So it wasn't easy. I mean, I needed some of that time just to get out of it a
Reset.
little bit. But then I was ready to come back. And I really felt like, okay, Mark, you did some things. I helped start the Boys and Girls Club of Geneva and Geneva Community Projects, which did the Seneca Lake Whale Watch, if you remember that, and other things. But I felt like, what do I want to do the next 10 years or something? And I really felt like this area, what we have is the environment here. We have the lakes. We have some of the best farmland in the world. We have good air. So what's the next fight? And it was, we got to fight for this place, this environment. So that's when I said I'm not going to run for judge again. I've got to get back in it.
So this the landfill issue in Ontario County and even Seneca County, you guys are kind of wedged right in between both of them. Was that the sort of tipping point for you? Was that the issue that really got you going, or was it kind of a coalition of many?
Well, there was a bunch of things, but actually it was the landfills that started waking me up to the point where I can't sit back anymore and not be able to even write a letter to the editor and let my voice be heard about these issues. And we had a supervisor in the town of Geneva, Mary Luckern, who had served 16 years, and she was getting pretty old and getting near the end of her time. And that's when I thought, this could be an opportune time for me to get involved. And I was attracted to the supervisor position because not only is it you're a town supervisor, but you're on the county board, and that's where these decisions on the landfill were being made. So I started getting involved a little bit before that with the Zero Waste Coalition in Geneva, and that's when I thought, I'm going to run for something.
So talk to us a little bit about that Ontario County Board, who just made a pretty, I would say, impactful decision a couple last week, was it? When the no vote happened on the variance that would alter the buffer between bedrock and liner at the landfill in Ontario County, correct?
That's correct.
So walk us through what that was, A, what it was like, and B, what that felt like as you were one of the big spurs behind having that become a no vote.
Well, it had come first to the Environmental Quality Committee, which I am on, and that's the committee in Ontario County that oversees the landfill. And in the committee, they brought it to us, and they said, we want to just change there's by regulation, the buffer between the bottom of the liner and bedrock is supposed to be 10 feet of earth. And they wanted to shorten it to 5 feet. Because there's a bunch of bedrock very close, and they were explaining how they'd have to excavate all this bedrock, and we're going to put this stuff in there that it won't be any worse. You'll go down to a 5-foot buffer. So the idea, by the way, is once the liner is breached, if the liquid leachate and this other nasty stuff that's in the landfill gets to bedrock, it's going to flow and get to water, get to groundwater, and get into eventually the lakes. So they made the argument, well, the DEC grants these kinds of variances. They're really looking at changing the rule. It's not that big a deal. We're going to put in this fill that's going to be less permeable. And then the other thing they said is, and we're going to save $1.8 million, and we're going to, they're telling the DEC, they're showing us the variance application that we, the county, as the permit holder, have to approve, even though we are under contract with Casella. So unlike Seneca Meadows, by the way, Ontario County owns this property and technically owns the permit. And we've just leased it out, basically, to Casella to manage. So we have to be the applicant in things, technically speaking. So so they said we're going to save $1.8 million, and DEC, this is Casella speaking in this variance application, we'll use some of this money to help the county in its solid waste management plan and hazardous household hazardous waste pickup and all that. So we're in the meeting, and I started asking questions. This is the committee meeting, and I say, well, what about the $1.8 million? What's our share? I said, I think we ought to split it. You're going to, 900,000, assuming that the environmental issues are addressed. And the representative from Casella says, I said, so what are we getting? And he basically said nothing, despite what was in this application about sharing the wealth, so to speak. On the spot, he said, no, we're doing a household hazardous waste which they already have to do by contract. And a second one in our lease says that if we do a second one, they have to pay half and the county pays half. So they're basically offering what they already by contract have to do. So they were offering nothing, which got me a little agitated. And then we got into the issue about I had read, we were informed, the committee, that there was some contaminated soil that was brought in just a few days before this meeting that turned out to have really badly affected. The odors were overpowering some of the workers up there that were spreading it. So they tested it, and it had higher than allowed levels of benzene. That's BENEZENE. If you want to Google it, it's not good stuff. It's a powerful carcinogen. You don't want to be exposed to very much of it. So I raised this at the committee meeting. We're bringing in all this contaminated soil, which is a loophole, basically. So just to explain that quickly, or try to be quick about it, we're not a hazardous waste landfill. But contaminated soil is technically not hazardous waste. And not only is it not hazardous waste, but they bring it in under a provision called BUD material. BUD stands for Beneficial Use Determination Material. So it doesn't even count towards the trash limit. So what the counties, what Casella's been doing, and because they get more money for it, is they'll get someone's removing contaminated soil from a site. It gets loaded on trucks and brought up here, and they're allowed to spread it as cover. So every day, if you know how landfills work, the trash goes down, then they're supposed to cover it every day, usually with soil or something. So we're using contaminated soil to cover our trash that has elevated levels of benzene in it. So I'm like, this is not a good thing. We have to be very sure about this not spreading anywhere. So, I'm raising these kinds of issues. In the committee, the variance request was approved 4-2, with me and City Supervisor Charlie Evangelista voting no, and the other 4 that were there voting yes. So that sends it on to the board as a committee recommendation. And then it came before the committee, and by that time they had also put together sort of a question and answer. They meaning the Casella and the yes forces to win the day in the full board. They did some homework, and they sent everybody out a bunch of stuff answering questions like describing, the permeability of the soil that they're going to use and things like that. So try to convince us, don't worry, this is all good. One of the things that I raised in the committee, and again, was this engineering that's supposed to make us feel everything's fine, is from Casella's engineers, Barton and LaJudas. They do a lot of work for Casella. We should have an independent.
Well, one of the things that struck me, and it was one of the things that you said at that board meeting before the vote actually happened, I believe, the meeting before the vote actually happened, I should say, was that you were a little bit surprised and kind of taken aback, it seemed, by the fact that they weren't there. No one from Casella was actually present. Right. And that was what was that? Was that sort of do you think that might have been part of the tipping point for them, being that it was that seems like it was an important day for them to have been there?
At the committee meeting?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it was. So there's nobody from Casella there. And then here's another thing that I think hurt their cause was at the board meeting. So they've got this letter from Barton and LaJudas, which is Casella's engineering firm. Nobody from Barton and LaJudas is there to because I had a question about that, what they said about, well, there's no environmental problem. And I said, tell me what you mean by that. Nobody from Barton and LaJudas there. So instead the engineer from Casella gets up and sort of, tells his part about it. So that, I think the board members are sitting around scratching their heads going, nobody from Casella, nobody from Barton and LaJudas, but we have a letter. The people making the case are Casella people, basically. So we have this discussion so then we're at the board meeting, and there was a special committee meeting before the board meeting, at which time most of the discussion was had, really. And again, people said their piece, and I raised some of the issues that have been bothering me about the whole thing. And I said, well, I'll tell you what, how about not taking in any more contaminated soil? This, by the way, is not a small thing. We have taken in thousands of tons of contaminated soil.
Mm-hmm.
We had employees that were injured about a year and a half ago from the fumes of contaminated soil that they were digging up out of a site in Utica and trucking here.
Mm-hmm.
And we're spreading it. So our landfill is layers of trash, contaminated soil. Other bad things, by the way, can come in under asbestos,
Mm-hmm.
sludge. I mean, all this stuff is mixed up in this thing.
So after that vote took place, you guys there is the chance that this could come back up, or it isn't quite finished yet. Talk to us about
that vote at the Board of Supervisors that went against the variance,
Mm-hmm.
I was, to be honest with you, surprised. I thought we were going to get more than a couple, but I didn't think that we were going to win the day. And I think what changed it was you got somebody like Peg Hilton stood up from the town of Hopewell,
Mm-hmm.
saying, my family has been in farming for 2 generations, and another generation is coming, and we're dairy farmers, and the land is the most important thing we have.
Yeah.
And we have to protect the land. And people like that getting up and saying something, I think, really had changed the whole tenor there. And then the vote came, and the numbers of no votes exceeded yes votes, but some of the yes votes were the bigger towns, and it's weighted voting. So it was unknown till they did the tally, and it was only a very narrow win, 1,900 weighted votes and change to 1,800. And there were 3 people missing
Mm-hmm.
that could have changed the outcome.
So another one of the bigger issues in the town of Geneva that has sort of flown under the radar in the last couple months, it seems, is the short-term rental law. That, I think, is probably one of the most, for someone who doesn't live in the town of Geneva, one of the most confusing things that they see continually pop up in the newspapers and in the news. Walk us through what it is and what it has been over the last, say, year or so.
Right. So, yeah, we've been at this. It'll be 2 years this summer, but we're getting to the end.
Yeah.
There's actually going to be voted on tonight. I have a town board meeting tonight.
Okay.
And the resolution to approve the proposed short-term rental law is on the agenda. But what happened was basically, we've got lakefront property. We've got 6 or 7 miles of lakefront in the town of Geneva.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of these places are small. They're close together. And so if you're renting out to, college partiers and your neighbor lives there, they're not that happy about that.
Yeah.
If it's totally, just anything goes.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened was 2 summers ago, really, people got really upset, some people on Glass Factory Bay Road, because there were some houses that were clearly, overtaxing things. So there was one that was that was advertising 17 people. We can handle 17 people.
Mm-hmm.
And you get that kind of crowd in there and cars all over the place, and people got upset, and they came to the town and said, you got to stop this. And in fact, that road was zoned R1, and transient renting is not allowed in the R1 zone. So the code enforcement officer said, you got to stop renting.
Yeah.
Gave them some time. We ended up in court. We spent some time, I did with the code enforcement officer, looking at other places that have lakefront. What kind of codes do they have? So there are short-term rental regulations that basically looks at your place and says, okay, you have so many bedrooms, you can have so many people. Your parking has to be on site. So we're basically trying to bring some order to it, because we know there's going to be rentals, and the court cases have said you can't just say to somebody, you cannot rent your house.
Yeah.
So an outright ban seemed to me, we're not going to win that. We're going to spend thousands of dollars in court and eventually lose. People do use it, do as part of their livelihood to sort of pay their taxes. There's a few that just rent out, but most of them are people that actually live there too, and maybe rent for a few weeks. And so anyway, we decided the way to go is to regulate it. Mm-hmm. And that's what we've been working on. So we did a trial last summer through the court case, put it on hold, and they had to follow these regulations, and they did, and it was a quiet summer. It worked. The person that was advertising for 17 under our regulations had to go down to 12. So basically, people behaved better. The amount of people coming in was down, but people were still able to do it. So we said, well, it worked there. We should be able to expand this to the rest of the town. And that's what we're about. So basically, you apply, you fill out an application, you get a permit that says how many people you can have. You have to notify your neighbors. This is a big thing. You have to give us a contact person that can be reached. Cell phone, the whole thing. It doesn't have to be the owner, but it's got to be somebody that can be reached 24/7 if there's an issue there. And we give that information to the neighbors so that if, one door down or two doors down, they're doing something crazy, you can call somebody up who can get to them and say, hey, stop that. We have a noise ordinance in the town. So it's all posted now in this rental permit, what will happen if the law passes tonight. And so we're going to regulate it. And we tried to hit a happy medium. And, of course, the people that want no renting aren't happy. The people that want to freely rent aren't happy. And
that was going to be my next question. How do you think it, if you were going to make an assumption or take a guess, where do you think it sort of falls? Do you think most people agree with it, or do you think it's kind of polarized still?
I think most people agree with it now. We've tweaked it. Of course, if you don't want any renters around you, you're not that happy. But that's not most people. And we'll see how it goes. We write it. We think it's decent. If it doesn't work, we'll tweak it. I mean, if we find out that there are some loopholes or things that aren't working the way we had hoped, we'll change it and we'll see how it goes.
What has your take been on it along the way, given that obviously you see Geneva as a tourism sort of hub, so to speak, in the Finger Lakes region? Is this something that you feel like is sort of necessary to keep the ball rolling in the right direction, or?
I think so. I mean, people want to come here. They want to visit wine country and everything. It's good for the economy. I also think I sympathize with people. It seems like these days everybody's becoming an entrepreneur of some way or another. If you have a nice car, you're an Uber driver in a city, and it's your part-time job. If you live on the lake and you have an opportunity to rent for a few weeks or a month or something, to make things go, I don't think we should say to people you can't do that, as long as we can control it and keep it so that you're not interfering with your neighbors. So to me, I think it's the future, and we're better off regulating it and keeping it under control than first just letting it go with no regulation. And again, I don't think the ban is the right way to go, I don't think it would survive a court challenge.
Okay, so before we get you out of here, I have to ask, what do you think is the most untalked about issue that you think people, whether it's in Geneva or throughout the Finger Lakes, what is that issue that people should be thinking about moving forward, maybe aside from some of the things that people are hearing about frequently, like landfills or gas storage, for example?
Well, I'll tell you, we're working. It's related to the landfill, but I think it's important. The landfill, some of the landfill argument is, well, we have all this trash to throw away, so what are you going to do with it? Well, the answer to that, the county has passed a solid waste management plan, and in the town of Geneva, we're working on our own solid waste management plan. So we want to get rid of landfills. So in order to get rid of landfills, we got to stop throwing away and discarding the kind of stuff that we're discarding today. We've got to get to a point, so if Seneca Meadows is going to close in 2023 and Ontario County is going to close in 2028, which is the end of our lease, we got to be in a position at that time not to need them, or to need very, very little that is going to go somewhere else, hopefully. So we have to start reducing, recycling, reusing, swapping. And we're going to work on, we've got a solid waste management plan we're working on in the town of Geneva. The county's working on it. The state, it's not going to, you definitely have to do your thing local, but the state which says that under its own policy that landfilling is supposed to be a last resort, has not really put enough muscle or money behind that statement. So, the state's got to make it not economically a good thing and certainly not morally right to take trash from hundreds of miles away and load it on trucks and drive it into the Finger Lakes and dump it here. Mm-hmm. So, but we've got to get to a place where that's not needed. So maybe it's got to be a rule where you got to dispose of your trash within 20 miles of where it's generated. Mm-hmm. That will certainly wake everybody up that doesn't have a landfill that close. We have to reduce waste so that we get out of the landfill business and we can do it without a great hardship.
So I have to ask you, what has been your feeling of the sort of cross-border working together throughout, like between Seneca County and Ontario County, and even down at the southern end of the lake with the LPG? It seems like everyone in the Finger Lakes, more than in the past, has come together in a way. What's your perspective on that? What do you think of that?
I think it's great, and I agree with you. I think it's been building for the last few years. I'm sure it was gratifying for the concerned Seneca County citizens to have 300 people march, whatever it was, a month or so ago, because they've been like, there's 10 of them or 12 mm-hmm. of them. And a whole bunch of us came over from Geneva. I was in that march. And the people at Seneca, the Pure Waters Association and other people about the LP gas storage thing, it's been growing. I think people around here are appreciating what we have. And what mm-hmm. we have is water and air and land, and it's under pressure. Mm-hmm. The lakes they're very close to a tipping point. Mm-hmm. Algae blooms in the lakes. We have to work together, because around Seneca Lake, for example, there's a ton of municipalities. Same with Cayuga Lake. Mm-hmm. We have to work together. We can if we do a job in town of Geneva, good job, we're covering 6 or 7 of the 77 miles of shoreline. Mm-hmm. So, but I think it looks good. I think people are coming together. They're working together, and I think it's how we're going to save and preserve this area for our children.
There's been some. We have caught wind a little bit here of a march or a protest of some sort taking place in Ontario County on over Earth Day weekend at some point, yet to be determined. They're still working on it. Will you be participating in that march walk if it happens?
Oh, I'm pretty sure I will.
Yeah.
I'll definitely be joining that. And if you want to know about this tie, this is my Save the Children tie, which I wore
I like
especially for today. But I think, when I stand up and talk in these things, I say we're talking for people that are not here. Mm-hmm. Our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, none of which I have yet. We have to look. Those landfills are going to be there for hundreds of years. Mm-hmm. The landfill liner is not going to last hundreds of years. You can be sure of that.
All right. Well, we really appreciate you taking the time to come in, and I'm sure we'll be having you back in the future.
Thanks, Josh. My pleasure.
All right, so that's going to do it for us today. I'd like to thank Mark for coming on the show and remind our viewers that Inside the FLX airs Sundays at 7 p.m. on Time Warner Cable Channel 12. For the latest news, updates, and podcasts, download the Finger Lakes One app, which is available on Android and Apple devices, or check us out at fingerlakes1.com on your mobile or desktop browser. For Geneva Town Supervisor Mark Venuti, I'm Josh Durso, reminding you to join us next week on another episode of Inside the FLX.